Imagine waking up to find the government quietly took money from your savings. That's what happened in 1992, when Prime Minister Giuliano Amato drained 11 trillion lire from citizens overnight. It was meant to save Italy from collapse, but what pushed the country to such desperation? How did one of Europe's richest nations suddenly run out of cash? In the early 1990s, Italy looked rich on paper, but the numbers were lying. The country's debt had climbed past 100% of GDP, one of the highest in Europe. Interest payments alone ate up nearly 12% of national income, more than what the government spent on education, healthcare, and infrastructure combined. The Lira, Italy's currency, was collapsing under pressure. International investors were fleeing Italian bonds, demanding higher yields to compensate for the risk. The 10-year yield hit nearly 13%, an impossible level for a government trying to keep the lights on. The Bank of Italy quietly warned Prime Minister Giuliano Amato, "If we don't act immediately, we will run out of foreign reserves within days." Amato, a soft-spoken law professor turned technocrat, took office in June 1992, inheriting a ticking time bomb. His predecessors had promised reform, but every attempt to cut spending met resistance. Public debt had ballooned from 60% of GDP in 1980 to over 105% by 1992, and the budget deficit topped 10%. Italy was drowning in its own interest payments. Meanwhile, Europe was watching. The Maastricht Treaty, signed that same year, demanded strict fiscal rules for countries hoping to join the future Eurozone. Deficits below 3% of GDP and debt on a steady decline. Italy met neither condition. If it failed to fix its books fast, it would be left out of Europe's new currency club, a humiliation for a founding EU nation. The markets smelled panic. On June 2nd, the lira plunged despite central bank intervention. Reserves were evaporating, $2 billion gone in a single week. The Bank of Italy's governor, Carlo Azeglio Ciampi, described the situation bluntly. "We are facing a crisis of survival, not strategy." Inside Palazzo Chigi, Amato's ministers searched for answers: austerity, new taxes, privatizations. Nothing was fast enough. Time was running out, and Italy's credibility was cracking. Behind closed doors, they began whispering about something no democracy had ever tried before. The next move wouldn't just test economics, it would test trust itself. And it all began on one long, sleepless night in Rome. Midnight in Rome, the secret meeting that changed everything. The date is July 9th, 1992, and it's close to midnight. Palazzo Chigi, the Italian Prime Minister's office, is locked down. No journalists, no aides. Only a handful of men gathered around a table, faces pale under the yellow lights. The crisis has reached breaking point. Italy's reserves are nearly empty. Foreign investors are pulling billions a day. A bond auction earlier that week barely found buyers. Amato's team estimates that unless they raise 11 trillion lire immediately, the state won't be able to pay its bills. The options are bleak: raise income taxes, cut pensions, freeze salaries, or, as some propose, declare a short-term default. But each idea feels political suicide. And then, in the middle of the tense silence, Amato says something that stuns the room. What if we take the money that's already there? He proposes a one-time emergency levy, a 0.6% tax on every bank account in Italy, applied instantly and without warning. No notice, no announcement. The tax would hit everyone, from billionaires to retirees, directly through their deposits. Finance Minister Piero Barrucci hesitates. Others protest that people will see it as theft. But Amato insists, if we warn them, they'll empty the banks tomorrow morning. He argues it's the only way to stop a bank run before it starts. After hours of argument, the cabinet agrees. The measure will take effect at midnight, quietly embedded in a decree with dozens of other economic reforms. No press release, no leaks. Not even most parliament members will know until after it's done. It's a desperate act, and a bold one. As the ministers leave the palace in the early hours of July 10th, the city outside sleeps peacefully. Rome's lights flicker, unaware that history has just been rewritten in silence. By sunrise, every bank in Italy will hold less money than it did the night before. And by morning, 40 million Italians will wake up to find a piece of their savings gone. July 10th, 1992, when Italy woke up a little poorer. That Friday morning felt normal. Shops opened, radios played love songs, and newspapers talked about summer holidays. But inside every bank, something strange was happening. Balances didn't match the day before. Thousands of Italians walked in confused, thinking it was a glitch. It wasn't. Their government had quietly reached into their accounts overnight. People soon realized what happened. 0.6% of every deposit was gone. It didn't matter if you had 10 million lire or 100,000. The tax hit everyone. Someone with 10 million lire lost 60,000, about a week's salary for a middle-class family. For small shopkeepers, that meant rent money. For pensioners, it meant groceries. By noon, chaos spread. Bank lines snaked around corners. In Rome, angry customers demanded answers. In Naples, a man waved his passbook at a teller shouting, "Who gave you the right to steal from me?" Radio hosts broke the story wide open, calling it a robbery in broad daylight, except it happened at night. But here's the twist. Nobody could stop it. The decree was already law. The banks had already transferred the money to the state. Even the Bank of Italy confirmed it. Yes, it's true. The funds have been withdrawn. The government stayed silent for hours. When Prime Minister Giuliano Amato finally spoke, he called it a necessary sacrifice. He said Italy was facing collapse, and without this move, pensions, salaries, and even ATMs might have stopped working. But that logic didn't calm anyone. To ordinary Italians, it felt like betrayal. They'd trusted their banks for decades. Now that trust was gone in one night. Some people withdrew everything they had left, fearing another prelievo. Others opened safes, stuffed cash under mattresses, or sent money abroad. In Milan alone, over 200 billion lire left the country within a week. The shock wasn't about losing money. It was about realizing it could happen again. And yet, while the public raged, the crisis at the top was far from over. Because even after stealing time with this desperate move, Italy's deeper problem, the collapsing lira, was only getting worse. Why the government said it had no choice. When the fury hit Parliament, Amato's ministers defended themselves with numbers. Italy's debt had reached 2,000 trillion lire, nearly 93% of GDP. Interest payments alone cost more than 100 trillion lire a year. The European Union's Maastricht Treaty had just set strict new rules. No country could join the upcoming euro if its budget deficit was above 3% of GDP. Italy's deficit? Over 10%, way off the mark. So, Amato told the nation, "We did it to stay in Europe." The levy, he claimed, raised around 11 trillion lire, about 6 billion euros today, enough to plug the short-term hole and keep paying public wages. He argued it was the only way to avoid bankruptcy. If we failed, he said, Italy would have fallen out of Europe, and your savings would have been worth nothing anyway. But that explanation didn't ease the pain. Economists said the government could have issued temporary bonds or cut elite privileges. Instead, they'd taken directly from citizens' pockets. Some called it a panic move by technocrats. Others, including Bank of Italy's Ciampi, admitted privately that there was no time. Reserves were vanishing daily. The result was brutal but effective. Italy bought a few months of breathing room. Inflation slowed slightly, bond yields steadied, and foreign creditors calmed down. For now. But the trust damage was permanent. Polls from that summer showed that 70% of Italians no longer trusted their banks, and half said they'd never keep large savings in accounts again. Still, Italy's leaders believed they had survived the worst. They hadn't, because only weeks later a new kind of enemy arrived. One that didn't sit in parliament or banks, but in trading rooms in London and New York. And when those traders turned their eyes to the lira, Italy's real nightmare began. From crisis to currency war, how the lira's fall shook Europe. The money grab was supposed to calm things down. It didn't. It was like pouring water on a fire made of oil. The markets didn't relax. They went wild. Within weeks, the Italian lira was under attack. By September 1992, global investors had lost all faith in Italy's economy. The country's debt was massive, interest rates were through the roof, and now the government had literally taxed people's savings overnight. Traders started betting that Italy wouldn't be able to keep the lira stable inside Europe's exchange rate system. And once those bets started, there was no stopping them. Across London, New York, and Frankfurt, hedge funds and banks began short-selling the lira. One of the biggest players, George Soros. He'd already been betting against the British pound, and Italy looked just as weak. Traders were borrowing lire, selling them, and buying them back cheaper as the value dropped. It was like watching a nation bleed out in real time. The Bank of Italy fought back hard. Governor Carlo Azeglio Ciampi ordered massive interventions, buying lira with dollars and marks to push its value up. But the defense was expensive. In just a few days, the central bank burned through $48 billion in foreign reserves. That's billions. Gone, trying to defend a currency that no one believed in anymore. Interest rates hit 15%, then 17%, trying to keep investors from fleeing. But who wants to hold a currency falling by the hour? The market kept hammering it. On September 13, 1992, Italy had no choice but to surrender. The lira was forced out of the European exchange rate mechanism, the system that linked EU currencies together. In a single week, the lira lost 30% of its value. Imports suddenly became more expensive, savings lost purchasing power, and the cost of everyday goods soared. Many Italians, already angry from the July tax, now watched their currency collapse too. The same year, the Italian government had taken money from its citizens and lost control of its currency. It was humiliation layered on top of desperation. But there was a strange twist. That devaluation, painful as it was, also made Italian exports cheaper. Suddenly, factories in the north found their goods selling faster abroad. The fall of the lira, in a strange way, gave the economy a small push, just when it needed one most. Still, the public didn't forget what came before, because if the markets had taken their currency, it was their own leaders who had taken their trust. And in the years that followed, that memory would haunt every Italian government that touched people's savings again. The legacy of a night nobody forgot. The phrase prelievo forzoso, the forced withdrawal, became part of the Italian language forever. Even today, if someone says they're planning another 92, everyone knows what it means. The government taking your money while you sleep. Giuliano Amato, the man behind the plan, defended it for decades. He said, "It was the only way to stop Italy from falling into the abyss." And maybe he was right. Without that move, Italy might have defaulted. Pensions could have stopped, and salaries might have bounced. But truth doesn't erase memory. For millions of Italians, it still felt like a betrayal. After 1992, people started hoarding cash. You could see it everywhere. Envelopes hidden in drawers, gold coins bought quietly, safety boxes full of lire. A report by the Bank of Italy in 1993 said that over 200 trillion lire had been withdrawn from savings accounts across that year. That's billions sitting under mattresses, invisible to the system. Foreign investment also froze. Why would anyone trust a government that could dip into private accounts without warning? The lira kept swinging in value for years, joined the euro and moved on. But something in its national spirit had changed, a quiet distrust of both bankers and politicians. The funny part? That one-night tax actually saved Italy's place in Europe. It gave the country the liquidity it needed to meet EU conditions. Without it, Italy might have been left outside the Eurozone entirely. But the victory came at a human cost: the erosion of faith. Even now, decades later, whenever Italy faces a financial scare, older generations whisper the same warning: let's hope they don't do another 92. Because for one night in July, Italians learned the most painful truth of all. Sometimes the hand that empties your wallet doesn't wear a mask. It wears a government seal. Italy's 1992 money grab proved that even in peace, nations can wage financial war on their own people. Subscribe for more true stories of hidden crises, bold decisions, and the nights that changed history forever. Thanks for watching.